Reinvent every industry. Inside Analysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome to the future. Indeed, it's coming our way all the time, the future is, and there are leading indicators and lagging indicators and all kind of fun stuff going on. But we are in this beautiful information economy, and I got to tell you, there are parts of the economy that are doing just fine. The data world, of course, our focus for today and all shows, the information economy. The data world is rocking and rolling, folks. Your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, and with me today, my very special friend, Sarbjeet Johal, a longtime Silicon Valley veteran who's worked for a number of big companies. He's now out there doing counseling and advisory work for a bunch of really cool software companies. And we're going to talk about the Snowflake Summit and also the Splunk conference that both happened in Vegas a couple weeks ago now. Time flies and you're having fun. And I got to tell you, folks, the Snowflake Summit blew my mind. I am really impressed by what they have done. I'll get Sarbjeet's thoughts here as well. But what I think they've done especially well in this data industry is design a meaningful partnership program. They have a very clear line of demarcation, it seems to me, about partnerships and how they do partnerships. And in our industry, there have been a lot of partnerships over the years that seem like partnerships, and there were someone once called them press release partnerships, which I thought was kind of funny. And then there are real partnerships where you collaborate and you work on things and you co-sign clients and so on and so forth. And Snowflake really seems to have done an excellent job in managing that whole program. And it works pretty simply. It works like this. Snowflake will manage your data. You do the analysis, you build apps on top of it, and there you go. It's pretty clear cut. And I would argue that Snowflake has become what Cloudera always wanted to be when it grew up. And we kind of watched that whole era when a lot of lessons were learned, a lot of great stuff was done, but I don't think the promise ever really came through, at least writ large, for the whole Hadoop movement. And that's what Cloudera really pioneered, along with Hortonworks and MapR. And of course, MapR got bought by HP, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of got absorbed into that particular Borg. And now Hadoop isn't really talked about much, but it's still out there. The HDFS file system is still all over the place. Companies are figuring out ways to reintegrate that or to continue to leverage those programs. But long story short, Snowflake Summit I thought was really impressive. Let's bring in my buddy Sarbjeet Johal to comment on that. Sarbjeet, there are other big players in the industry. Teradata has been around forever. Of course, Oracle Open World. Microsoft is a huge force to be reckoned with. Lots of big companies out there. But in this particular niche, which is a pretty powerful one, I feel like Snowflake so far has kind of won. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, they have a architectural sort of advantage as well as business model advantage. I think those are two key advantages they have, and they played clever, I call it, and it's working out for them. And as we know, there's so many companies into the data warehousing, in running AI ML on top of that, what we're doing these days. But traditionally, our BI was done through the data warehouses, which were away from the transactional databases, right?
Right.
And Snowflake tackled that first. That's democratized the BI, business intelligence, you can call it, analytics and real-time analytics. We are doing that these days, and it's performant. It's the compute part you pay only for the time you're doing the queries. You're not paying all the time like traditionally we were. So again, business model advantage and architectural advantages. They handle that. But during the summit, they announced that they are merging the transactional data with the data data warehouse, which you use for AI ML and business intelligence and analytics in general, right? So they're merging these things, and that's a huge step forward. And the second biggest announcement they made was bringing application to the data now. So
right. I heard that, and let's just explain that to our audience. A couple things Sarbjeet just mentioned. So Unistore, they announced, right, which is where they're going to have all these applications, and they're going to be merging, as he suggests, analytical and transactional workloads, which have always been very different and very different solutions to do them. We came up with column-oriented storage because it's great for analytics. It's good for compression. Everything in the column is supposed to be the same, so it's easier to compress, and it's better for doing quick analytics. But there's a whole host of new sort of real-time operational analytical plays coming out there. But guess what? Snowflake is part of that now, and that's one of the things that they talked about. And then bringing the apps to the data is kind of interesting, because I heard, I guess it was during Frank Slootman's keynote, he was talking about, for years and years, we've had ODBC and JDBC, which are the drivers for getting data out of a database and into an application. That's been the way to do it for years. We've spent all this time and effort moving the data over towards these transactions. And now they're talking about doing it all inside of Snowpark, basically, as I understand it, which is kind of interesting. I mean, from an architectural perspective, can you explain how that gets done, for a layman like myself and our audience to understand? That's a very significant shift, and theoretically, it should greatly improve performance, for example, because you don't have a lot of I/O. It's like a serverless environment, right? So it should improve performance, but how can you help us understand how that actually works?
To be honest with you, I am learning about it, and they're bringing the Python integration in. Once a language comes to the data warehouse, they had a couple of other languages which they did prior to Python. I can list that in a minute. So they brought the Python through their Streamlit acquisition they did in March this year. So it still is in works, to be honest with you. I mean, that's what I have heard from so many analysts and people, practitioners there and partners, that these are kind of pre-announcements, getting the market ready to digest this as these things are rolled out. And the idea is to, like how Oracle does Java in the database, right? That, right?
Right.
So you can do a lot more when you're sitting in the database, part of the stored procedures and or procedural language. You can use Java as that language layer inside to conduct your business logic, and that's the same sort of mechanism they're using. Yes, and that's what my read is. And data products are being talked about these days. Data as a product, right? So I think it is a step towards that, enabling just not giving the data from the data marketplace, which they already have, right? Mm-hmm. They established in 2020, and now they're trying to turn that into data product. That's how I read it. That's how I interpret that. So by bringing the languages, and 3 at this point now, they have announced to the data, I think it turns the data into data products.
Yeah.
It has logic with it.
Yeah. Well, and they got so many announcements. I don't think we could even get through them all if we tried to give some detail on them. But they also talked about, for example, resource groups. And I was talking to Single Store last week, I guess it was, and they have a similar concept where they are trying to facilitate what is a core component of so-called data mesh architecture, which is being able to govern the compute for specific jobs and specific groups. So these Snowflake stories, they have these resource groups that you can allocate, and then theoretically you could be able to track what it costs. So the queries on that particular domain that you're managing, the storage, all that stuff could theoretically be calculated on a much more granular level, which of course is great news, right? I mean, in the data center, when it's all in-house, you have to pay for everything that you've got, including all time and resources, but you didn't pay per query per se. You just paid and you paid to keep the whole thing running, which is very expensive. So we've kind of shifted now to more of a pay as you go. But to me, this resource groups, that's a pretty significant development too. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a huge. Okay, I see it in 2 different ways. One, they did that first, the pricing is you pay for the compute when you're just running the queries. Otherwise, you don't pay for it. You just pay for the storage. And their magic thing is that they use the object storage mechanism S3 at AWS, and Azure has similar facilities, and so does Google GCP, right? They use that storage, which is meant to be used as raw storage, if you will, object storage, as a storage layer for the data warehousing sort of storage, right? And then their magic happens when they ingest the data into that storage, right? It does indexing on the fly.
Right.
So it turns that into a relational database, if you will, which you can, run all kind of queries. And then also it scales horizontally. So there's unlimited pool of compute, if you will. You can run your queries much faster. And also you pay for the time when you're running the queries as compared to the traditional sort of approaches. So companies can nibble on it. Actually, that's how I see it. Like how the cloud was, like the AWS and Azure and everybody else that gives you these free credits, and then you use it, and then you get sort of addicted to it,
Right.
and then you can't do without it. It's like drugs, right?
That's right. First one's free, kid.
So this is the data drug kind of company. So I think, funny. They give you these they let you taste the analytics in a modern way, and once you do that, it's hard to go back from there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And when I'm writing, I'm still writing. I'm a still writer these days, but I'm still writing my review and story about Snowflake and the summit. And I'm kind of walking through all these different announcements they've made and trying to put things in context. And I'm writing about how Snowflake is now offering you, as we're suggesting, to build the apps on top of their engine, to where you're literally bringing the app to the relational data warehouse that they have built, or virtual warehouse, as they refer to it in some instances. And I thought to myself, from a business perspective, someone might be wondering, well, doesn't Google do that with Google Cloud Platform? And doesn't Microsoft offer that with Azure? And doesn't Amazon offer that with AWS? And the short answer is yes, they do. I think the longer, more interesting answer is how you can optimize performance, especially for data-driven and analytics-driven apps. And I think that's really where some of the magic occurs, right? Is that you can do some really powerful things because you're sitting on top of this relational engine, as opposed to just using a traditional database. Like, and I say traditional, meaning MongoDB or Couchbase or any of the other databases that are out there. Of course, DB2 and Oracle has lots of databases still. I think that's the interesting thing, is that they have done some really good work in managing how you can deploy these things and managing how they actually operate, namely in a much more efficient manner. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think true. I agree with you that what the statements you have made. But on top of that, they have made the data governance easy. The security side is easy. Is made easy. Who gets to access what is made easy. The data anonymization is built in. So there are a lot of things which are built into one platform, whereas if you go with other solutions, you have to get the data anonymization from somebody else, and security bolt on from somewhere else, and it is like kind of in a way disjointed kind of solutions, right? But here it's like all in one offering, and also it's kind of well contained data store, if you will, right? For LOB or for a small division in a company. So in a true sense, I think it helps the data democratization to the people who need to get to the data. Like traditionally, the data was kept behind these high walls, and only people with, people have to go through all the hoops to get the access to the data warehouse to run queries against it, right? So it was very specialized function, but now it's being democratized. So LOBs can do that. So it has been made super simple to use as well. So simplicity is, I think, number one trait which they push for. and usability. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think that's a very, very good point, because from a business perspective, and in particular from an IT perspective, complexity equals pain, misery, cost, fragility, all kinds of bad things come from complexity. But if you can simplify the delivery of your services and use this sort of all-in-one type of environment, well, if the all-in-one includes everything that you need, or most everything you need, that becomes a very compelling storyline, right? Because you're just making the IT people and the data people a lot happier because their lives are easier, right?
Yeah, actually, in another part is that bringing the new people under the fold of like business intelligence or AI, ML, it's giving the new entrants like the taste of like lightweight platform, if you will, which is simple to use. The accessibility, actually, I say this all the time. You can have the best of the breed technology, but if it's not easily accessible to the practitioners who are just entering the field, it can go only so far.
Right.
Like you and I both know that how easy it is to get to the Oracle data warehouse versus you pick Teradata, you pick the traditional databases, right? As compared to how easy it is to get to Snowflake, right? They have sample data, publicly available data, and all that stuff. You can train yourself on that. You can get certifications, and I usually say that to outcompete your competition, you have to out educate the market. So I think they're doing a good job of that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Well, folks, we're talking today with Sarbjeet Johal. I met him in person finally at the Snowflake Summit just a couple of weeks ago out there in Las Vegas, and things are happening. Boy, I tell you what, conferences are back. I think they're back with a vengeance. In fact, I'm always tracking terms and language to kind of see where things are going in our society. And I heard a term called revenge travel or something like that. I'm like, oh my goodness. And they're referring to people just saying, I've had enough staying home. I'm going to get the heck out there and go do some fun things. And that is happening writ large right now. But don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with some more on the Snowflake Summit. We'll talk about the Splunk Summit too, and really try to hash out for all of you what this really means, what's happening in the world of data. A lot is happening, folks. It's very exciting. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial. You are listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Take us to the future.
All right, folks, take us to the future indeed. We're talking with Sarbjeet Johal today, industry analyst and veteran of Silicon Valley, and we just hooked up at the Snowflake Summit. We'll also talk a bit about the Splunk conference and a little bit about Cisco Live as well. I didn't attend either of those, but I'm curious to hear the upshot of what's going on. But at the Snowflake Summit, one of the things they talked about, again, is this data cloud that they have. It's not a new idea, but it's a new idea in terms of its implications and its spin and its architecture. And it's an idea that makes an absolute mountain of sense. And Snowflake had the vision to see this coming down the pike and really to build out for it. So at the event, they talked about all data, all workloads. They have their 7 pillars that they use as their guiding light, if you will, for their technology. And they talked about data sharing. So think about if you're an insurance company, for example, and maybe you're partnering with it'd be hard to partner with the hospitals because there's a bit of a Chinese wall between those. But think like a retailer and a bank, for example. They want to start sharing some data that they're authorized to share. Well, you can do a sort of bespoke solution, and that's going to be expensive and painful and complex and hard to maintain. And difficult to manage. And it's also, of course, a big security issue, a governance issue. But since Snowflake has built out this data marketplace, and they're really focused on the data cloud, they can really facilitate those kinds of collaborations, which are hugely valuable if you do them correctly. And so they talk about, Frank Slootman in his keynote talked about stable edges and active edges. A stable edge would be two companies that want to collaborate on an ongoing basis. So Snowflake will manage the connection between these information systems, and they'll manage and offer security and governance around that. and Active Edge is one just for a short period of time, maybe to test out some collaboration. But this data sharing and data collaboration is going to be a hallmark of success in the future, I guarantee. And so I think Snowflake has really stolen a march on all the competition by being big enough to do this in a meaningful way, and by doing it seriously enough that it's really taking off. So, Sarbjeet, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on their strategy and on data sharing and data collaboration, and kind of your experience about what really goes on behind the scenes at a lot of big companies that most people probably don't know about.
Yeah, actually, during the break, we were talking about this whole concept, like how data travels from entity to entity, and data travels a lot more than what we normal people think that it does. For example, when we swipe our credit card, I used to work at Visa. So when you swipe your credit card, the data goes to payment processor, it goes to the bank, and the data goes to credit bureaus, in the merchant as well. So data goes to different places at the same time, and most of the time we end up replicating that data. So everybody has a copy of that. But just imagine having a central repository where that they can have access to that central place, and they are not replicating the data. So they have access to it, but they don't have to store it there. So those kind of facilities, I think, can simplify the data exchanges, and also they help us keep the data integrity intact. So once you copy the data, something changes in the original record for whatever reason, then you are having this trouble of like synchronizing the changes and so forth. That happens in the B2B commerce. The data goes to different parties, to supplier, to the buyer, from buyer to supplier, to the shipping company, and to the custom people, if it's international trade and so forth. In healthcare, same thing happens in auto industry, and in the manufacturing, you can say, and also especially in the financial sector. We do most of our products, and 90+% of our financial products are just data. I mean, right. It's just the bits, right?
Right.
We don't move money, in the suitcases anymore. We just move money with the bits. So it's all data moving around.
That's
and yeah, it is. It is. And anything which simplifies that exchange of data, it just goes a long way.
Yeah, and you brought up such a huge point, and I'm almost embarrassed that I didn't mention it when I handed it over to you, but replication, because you're right. In the past, you would replicate the data from your partner, and now you have to store it somewhere and manage it, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you can just give access to this centralized repository, holy Christmas, you just saved a whole mountain of time, money, effort. And by the way, you improve quality, because in replication, that's when things don't get updated properly, or that's when you get a stale copy of the data, for example. I mean, there are whole strategies around data replication, which are everywhere these days. I mean, that's not going to go away. But the fact that Snowflake has enabled this marshaling area for data, allowing you live connections to the real data, that's just really significant, and saves a lot of time, a lot of money, improves quality. It's it's a slam dunk, really. So, and to me, I don't see anyone else in the data space that has done as good of a job at really pushing this forward and making it a core concern for the enterprise. What do you think?
I think the efforts were there, but the problem is the verticalization of the data marts, if you will. So there's a data marketplace, if we can say, for healthcare, data marketplace for auto, the data marketplace for different verticals, right? It was hard to create those marketplaces with the older stacks, I believe that. And once we are building the sort of data stores on top of this extreme capacity, you can say the almost unlimited capacity, which is the cloud, public cloud. Once we are building on top of that, I think that some of those limitations go away, and the vertical scaling helps, right? And using that newer architecture where you're using the very commodity kind of hardware, and you have 3 copies of the data, or you can have 5, depending upon what the sensitivity of that data is. You can change those numbers or the configurations. and you have that redundancy of data, and then on top of that, you can pull that into memory and have at it, put compute there, and just bang on it, if you will, for queries, for real time or near real time analysis. Actually, we are going towards the real time analysis of data, like when you are putting things in the shopping cart at Amazon, they are quickly comparing that to you, like how many times you abandon the shopping cart, how they can keep you there, how can they make you push that buy button. And the data rich companies are only rich because they know how to use it, use that data meaningfully. Otherwise, data, if you don't use it, it's like, actually it's a liability, not even a plus. So you have to use the data you have at your disposal, and this helps you use it with the ease and with the economics works in your favor as well. If you don't get the value from it, you will stop using it. And by the way, on that note, I think it's clever of Snowflake folks to bring the application to the data now, because if you are just charging for the time you're using the compute for query, then your revenue is a lot less predictable, right? You can't predict the revenue. In a bad economy, people may cut down on that a little bit, so. But if the application comes there, that thing stays constant, right? So that's what my assumption is, but I will verify that in the coming days, that they want to make it more like a sticky product more than what it is now.
That's interesting. So basically what you're kind of hinting at here is enabling a much greater ability to leverage analytics within the management of an application, and to kind of use that as a barometer to understand what's really happening. And that makes it, well, and also just the visibility of what's happening and what it means, the analysis side of things. The faster your analytics run, the more engaged you're going to be as a person, and the stickier that application gets. Is that about right?
Yes. I mean, yes, but also, like, mainly, one of my main point was not what you mentioned. My main point is, when you bring the transactional data next to, or in the same storage layer, if you will, where your analytics data is, right? It's the same sort of shared tables, if you will, and then that makes the transactional data is the part of application, right? You're writing to it on every day-to-day basis, right? So that needs constant compute. There's a more need for that. The most of the analytics, like traditionally, and still, we do like in batches, or even if it's not batches, it's like bursts, right? And then it goes away, burst goes away. But the applications are constant. They have to be up and running. So it has to be ready to go, and then you can press a button and save the data, blah blah blah, right? So so I think that we will know once the pricing comes out on the transactional side of the usage. You will notice that it's more stickier. It's more time-wise. You have to pay more for longer time, longer duration, as compared to when you're just doing the analytics on the data, right?
I see. Yeah. So Snowflake will make more money.
Yes, definitely.
That's always a driver. I mean, these folks have to go make money, right? And we're in a very strange market right now in terms of the stock market, and where some high riding companies were previously and are not now. But you do get a good sense of truth in understanding the world around you when the market goes down, because low tide tends to reveal who was not doing well enough versus who is doing well enough. Some interesting stories there. But that's not, go ahead.
And also, I think the smart vendors actually, when they know that it's hard to enter straight into a market, like going straight into the market, it head-on collusion with the big guys, right? Oracles of the whole world and DB2s and other data companies, right? Traditional companies. but they smart companies back into it, right? These guys are backing into it. So they started with the analytics, and now they're backing into the transactional side of the world. Yeah.
That's a very, very astute observation, I have to say. That's pretty clever stuff. And there's a great pitch for it as well. Not just, hey, we Snowflake will make more money. No, they're saying that you're number one, the environment will be more conducive for developers. You're making their lives easier. That's a big pitch across the board these days, is how do you make the developer experience more seamless, more robust, more comprehensive, basically, so you're not having to bounce around in different areas. That's a big part of it. But to your point, yeah, once companies do start writing and deploying their applications on top, like inside of Snowflake, which is in database. I mean, you mentioned it yourself. I remember as I was listening to him talk, I'm taking notes. I'm like, oh, this is in database, the in database play, like stored procedures, Java inside the engine, et cetera. That's a pretty clever move. But to your point now, it's also a very smart business move to become the center of gravity. And there's a sort of natural evolution here to absorb those transactional workloads as well, right?
Yeah, actually, there's a concept of what a new term have thrown into the market. It's called feature proximity. So when you're using one feature to do one thing, right? In this case, it's business or data analytics. So you were using Snowflake and likes of Snowflake for data analytics, right? But in the proximity of analytics is the application, right? So that's where the data actually comes from, and it's very close to it, right? So you can say in traditionally we got adjacent markets or adjacent you can say the workloads, right? In this case, but I think the proximity of the features matters. So again, you have this feature which is kick-ass, and now you want to build another feature which is widely used for transactional database, persistence, CRUD we call it usually, right? Create, update, delete, and read kind of stuff, right? For applications. Now you're creating that feature sitting next to the analytics, and then next to that will be the message queuing and stuff like that, which is done by other people. I have this inclination that Snowflake may get into that kind of sort of world as well. And another opportunity for Snowflake is to address the data synchronization between the edge and the cloud, central repositories and the edge locations. I think that's a huge opportunity. They have not been talking about that, but I think they will end up going there as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, the point is they have a huge center of gravity right now. We saw that. I think there were 198 vendors in the exhibit halls. I actually counted them. That's how I know. From their website, I counted 198. It's almost 200, of course, vendors. And again, like, they are a center of gravity. And so what's cool is that there's so much work that can be done to optimize the engine, to optimize the delivery, to optimize the data cloud, for example, that they don't really need to start chewing into other markets, which is what a lot of times has happened historically with these partnerships. The partnership is great for a while, and then the big partner just kind of chews up the little partner or rolls out something similar. That happens all the time. But don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Ladies and gentlemen, back here on Inside Analysis. We're talking all about the information economy, as always, talking to my buddy Sarbjeet Johal. I just ran into him at the Snowflake Summit, but you were there for a couple other conferences, really, and mostly for Splunk, right? You're only at Snowflake for like an hour and a half, but you did a lot of moving around when you were there. But tell us a bit about Splunk, and I'll give my take on what Splunk does. They've focused on machine data for a long time, so being able to pull data off of all sorts of systems, whether it's manufacturing or business or whatever, any kind of business system you have, to be able to better manage your technology. Like they have a lot of offerings around phone data. So all the different phones that go out there, you can kind of track how your app is doing across all these different phones and different versions and things like that. So it's great for optimizing machines. It's great for kind of understanding where the costs are, and definitely for troubleshooting. It's a real boon for being able to troubleshoot what are very complex systems these days. But I'm not terribly up to date on the latest with Splunk, so maybe just give us an update on what they're focused on, what they're doing, and how it affects the real world out there.
Yeah, I think Splunk has made considerable amount of progress in their new version of platform, which is version 9.0. They released a bunch of new capabilities in that, and they are turning the dial on the machine learning and searchable index in the virtualization of the search of the data, if you will. So the key is, the two key things they talked about was the security and observability. So they are focusing a lot more on security, and the third pillar is the complexity, which is all our operations are becoming more and more complex with the microservices and with the mobile, as you mentioned, right? It's everywhere, right? So the applications are so small in nature, they're distributed. How do we monitor these things, and how do we observe the from the security point of view, and also from the performance point of view, right? So application APM, application performance management, is another sort of pillar which they address that. So security and observability were the two key pillars they talked about. And as their CEO said that, Gary said that security is mainly a data problem. Seriously, that we can leverage the monitoring data from the machines to enhance security, right? So we can change the policies on the fly based on what we are seeing in the logs and in the telemetry data. Wow. They're also making these things more interoperable by sort of leveraging and also leading the open telemetry standard as well. So they're trying to open up the platform to a greater sort of audience, and also greater sort of ISV community, if you will. And I think they're on the right track. Metrics and logs and traces, they enable the ingestion of that into the platform, and you can cook up new stuff based upon the data models Splunk will provide you out of the box, and you can create your own as well.
Interesting.
So as you know, that there's already marketplaces for the data models like C3 AI in general, right? But just imagine having a marketplace for operations data, right? Which has the pre-built models for you, where you can detect the anomalies and fix those in the security sphere, and also in the performance areas. So yeah, I think opportunities are huge. Let's see how the market receives it, and how good of a job Splunk does with the partner ecosystem. I think that I told them actually very honestly that they need to beef that up a little bit. So
well, you're a very candid guy, and that's why people want you around, right? To give them honest advice. And that's what you need if you're going to do this stuff right. And as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, 3 letters are very meaningful for Splunk: IoT, right? I mean, the IoT infrastructure, to me, it's kind of interesting because I don't see anyone having sort of won that marketplace. And I think it's partially because it's so vast. I mean, there's just so much to it. There are so many devices. I mean, IoT refers to everything that is touching the web, which these days is, we're talking, isn't it over 1 trillion or something? I mean, it's a ridiculous number of devices, and they all have their own processors and their own data that they use. And you have all these issues to manage around, wherever this object is, that the transmission tends to be a bit faulty, right? So you have to be able to to manage for that, to manage for sparse data, missing data, all these kinds of things. And it's really in the aggregate of those where the permutations are just through the roof, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great place for them to focus their energy, because IoT is going to be, I mean, you can't even put it in one bucket. There are just so many different applications for it, right?
Yeah, I think Edge is a huge play for them, and they talked about that, but with some reluctance. I don't know why that was there. It was not put like front center. I thought they should do that, put that front center, the Edge, story, if you will, because they can serve the Edge in a very meaningful way. And sometimes I think that some companies out there they have a very good platform, and because it's so good that it can be used in so many different industries in so many different ways, and I think at that point the magic happens if you can create these industry specific use case kind of messaging, if you will. I think the go-to-market strategy becomes much more harder. At the same time, it's an opportunity as well. So you can like tell the story around like how you will use that in the IIoT, in industrial IoT, and how will you use the consumer IoT? How will you use that in manufacturing and versus healthcare and so forth, right? So that you can create the relatability, and sometimes I've said that many times to a few vendors actually, that sometimes your community is so strong it becomes like culty kind of thing, right? It's cult kind of thing, and they hold you hostage to okay, do this only, you did like just the telemetry data for operations. I think Splunk is much more capable platform as a platform of doing a lot more things than just focusing on the telemetry data coming from machines alone. It's really powerful system, I believe. Yeah, I've seen it in works.
Well, and again, the number of applications, the number of businesses that can benefit from using that sort of technology, you're streamlining operations. And what is a business? If you get right down to brass tacks, a business is operations.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got sales and marketing and accounting and all this other stuff that you have to do to stay in business, marketing to get your business, et cetera. But the core of what the business actually does, that's ops. And it's why you hear so much about ops these days. We started with DevOps, now there's data ops and ML ops and AI ops. And, ops is when the work gets done, folks. Just so you know, when you hear the term ops, they're talking about the stuff you have to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's it. Well, let's tease Cisco. Maybe we'll do that for the podcast bonus segment. You also went to Cisco Live. What's going on there, real quick?
And actually, I was watching it virtually.
Okay.
And when I came home, I watched their keynote. I think they were really well put together. The messaging was much more simpler, a lot less convoluted or confusing. I think the keynotes I just loved it. The simplicity of it, like the future of work and how we will conduct the work, and they touched into the metaverse kind of stuff a little bit, but not too much. So Cisco is an important company. I think they are making strides into the infrastructure as code world as well, gradually. They are talking about the microservices. They have done quite a few acquisitions in that space, and they're becoming more and more kind of developer-friendly company. It's gradually they are doing that, yes. And I think that's where the magic lies. If you are a platform company, your number one focus needs to be on developers, I think, to start with, and then of course operations as well. But developers are the ones who you want to keep happy. They will build solution using your platforms.
That's right. Yeah, developers. I mean, I've watched that shift take place over the last few years, and it's now, I would say, either complete or at least it's reached a sort of peak where developers are really in charge. I mean, it used to be that people higher up in the organization were telling them what to do and what to use and where to go. And that's not the case anymore. The developers really drive decision makings about which platforms you use, what you build, what you don't build. It's all based upon what you're hearing from your developers, and the happier you make them and keep them, the happier you're going to be. But folks, you've been listening to Inside Analysis.